And what about the
2 months
hospital's
ago.
own energy bills?
Oh, I was just going to say about that. I mean, currently our energy bill for gas per year is £6.2 million. And that's going to go to £9.8 million as of November the 1st.
And that all comes out of the budget?
Well, it all comes out of front-facing budget.
That everything else comes out of, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I have to stop worrying about having a deleterious effect on people's equilibrium by covering this stuff, because we have to get this out there. I mean, could government be any more absent? Is it possible to conceive of circumstances in which they were more delinquent or a graver dereliction of duty than this? Because you know and I know that people that read the newspapers we're talking about, who essentially are choosing the next Prime Minister, they're probably not even going to believe you.
No, obviously not. I mean, there's lots of people, lots of friends of family that I speak to. And, you know, as a sideline, we've, you know, senior management, should I say, have not had a pay rise for 3 years.
Sure.
Who us? Yeah. Who us, as far as I'm concerned, when I'm on site and I'm seeing domestics, porters, catering staff, not worried about what they're earning. It's the fact of getting to work to earn the money because of the petrol they need in some of the rural areas in Norfolk to get to work. And unfortunately, they can claim their mileage back, but it's an upfront cost for them. It's a vicious circle, and I never thought in my time, you know, and I've always been a Conservative voter. I'll be very open about that.
Hence the shouting at the radio.
Shouting at the radio, absolutely, 100%. And I just don't know what. Everybody says things can only get better. I can't see it from here. I think we're going to go into...
Or give us a clue about what
worse.
it's going to look like. Give us a little clue about what it's going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm exactly the same as the previous caller. We're on a fixed-term tariff at the moment. We've had it for the last 2.5 years. Yeah. It runs out in January. Our costs are going to go up by probably 300%. That means we've got to pull our belt in. That doesn't mean that we're going to switch the heating off. And
sure.
I can't say I know how it feels, because I don't, but I can try and empathise how it feels, and we are doing everything possible to try and help them without embarrassing them, I think is the best way to put it.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. And that's part of the problem, perhaps, is that I can tell something's changed. It's why this hour we're not doing the personal experience of it. We're not talking to the people at the very coalface of suffering, but I can tell that something's changed, because that shame, if you want to call it shame, and I think that's probably the word we're talking about, that is dissipating, because I think it's just so much of it and it's so unsustainable, and people who never thought they'd be in these positions are now entering into these positions, and that, I think, changes the game slightly, doesn't it? It changes the picture.
It certainly does. I mean, my children are older, they're in their late 20s, early 30s. And they've all got their own properties. But I said to them quite clearly that you come to us before you go anywhere else if you're struggling, because I don't want you to go down that dark hole. Yeah. Now, obviously, we're in a position to do that, and we're very, very fortunate. But at this current trend of escalation, at what point are we going to have to start looking differently? And you know, and we never thought ever in our entire lives that we would ever be talking about pulling our belts in because of bills and stuff like that.
What happened to you? And I don't mean this in any cheeky sense, because the current crop is not who you are or who you voted for. But as a lifelong Conservative, what happened to your party?
It got greedy. It's too hung up on pleasing the shareholders and the big companies, and you know the fact that EDF is owned by the French government, and we're paying the highest utility bills ever, and the French government is forcing EDF to keep them low. That just tells a story in itself.
It does.
Because we're subsidising France in the roundabout way.
And anyone who piles in now and says, "Oh, wake up and smell the coffee," they've always been greedy. I've got your back on that, because there are levels. I mean, you know, where is the line between greed and aspiration, for example? Where is the line between incentive and greed? But greedy, it's a perfect word to use. There's nothing wrong with pursuing Profit, nothing wrong with pursuing wealth, but there comes a point where you prioritize it so completely over everything else that things fall apart.
Somebody said to me last week, when is enough enough?
Yeah.
And in my own mind, I'll be honest with you, I've worked my nuts off my entire career to get to where I am.
Of course.
I've been very fortunate with private education, etc. So I did get a stepping stone on the ladder. But I have worked constantly since leaving school, university, to get me to this position. And I've been able to do so. But lots of people can't do that because of the opportunities they've got or not got, as the case may be.
Enough is enough. When is enough enough?
I don't know. I always thought that me and my wife had enough.
Yeah, same.
But now, maybe not,
That's a fascinating way of looking at it. I've always looked at that question from like you, and I know this is your point, through the other end of the telescope. I've got enough. Regular listeners will know I often tell a story at this point involving two extremely wealthy New Yorkers and a psychoanalyst on Fifth Avenue, but I won't today. I'll spare you the well-rehearsed anecdote. Richard, thank you very much. And wow, it's 11:45. 11:47 is the time. I think I should probably apologise to the Mail and the Telegraph for picking on them all the time. I always forget about the Sun, as indeed many of their previous readers have done. But I think this is in today's paper. This is the leader in today's Sun. You don't have to be a militant Brexit. Remember, we're talking about imminent Armageddon. I hope that's an exaggeration. Listen, I hope you can text me in 6 months' time and say, remember when you were really worried about those warm banks? And I'll go, God, yeah, that was lucky, wasn't it? We dodged that bullet. And you can make all the capital out of it you want and pretend that it makes some sort of, cast some sort of shadow on my credibility. You could do what you want with it. If we avoid this iceberg that councils are already preparing for, and individual hospitals, as our last caller just alerted us to, are preparing for, if we actually miss the iceberg, that's great. As far as I'm concerned, that is fantastic. It would be great to be wrong. But as we contemplate the possibility of epic catastrophe hitting everything from hospitality to hospitals, this is the leader in today's Sun newspaper. You don't have to be a militant Brexiteer to wonder why the Cabinet's car fleet is being replaced by German Audis. Can no UK maker supply armoured vehicles? Remainer Boers will pillory that as a Little Englander view, but President Macron... I'm just speaking as a Remainer Boer. I'm just going to pause right there and say Remainer Boers are a lot more worried about old people not being able to heat their own homes or get to the warm banks being set up by councils that would allow them to spend a few hours a day not freezing. I can't speak for all Remainer Boers, although I am occasionally anointed as a sort of spokesperson for them all. But I can assure you that no Remainer Boers will be pillorying this leader column in the Sun as a Little Englander view. It's a completely devoid of intelligence view, but in the great scheme of things, it is utterly irrelevant. I personally couldn't care less where they get their cars from. The idea that you think it's hugely important, go you. I just hold the view that hospitals, schools, hospitality, businesses, huge swathes of the country facing unprecedented problems is a little bit more worthy of our attention than where the government gets its cars from. Okay, so why are you talking about it then? Because we need to understand why normal people have been led to such an abnormal position, why normal people are more exercised by statins, Meghan Markle and Audis than they are by the fact that their own hospitals are potentially introducing warm rooms for staff off shift to keep warm in, possibly even with their families. That's all. That's why it's important to pay attention to what these half-wits are doing, because where these half-wits lead, half the country, or 52% of the country, tends to follow. So Remainer Boers will pillory that as a Little Englander view, but President Macron insists on a French limo and Chancellor Scholz's is German. Can a British cabinet not have British motors? British motors for British cabinets. What is the most prominent British manufacturer of cars? As in British owned and British based. Dinky, I think, is it? These days? I don't know. Morgan's still going down in Malvern. Could struggle to get a kind of armoured limousine out. Oh, hey-ho. Anyway, that's what the second best-selling newspaper in the country is concerning itself with today. Emma's in Ashfield. Emma, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello. Emma.
Well, the more I've listened to the show, the more I've been angry and ashamed. But
don't be ashamed.
Of the country that we live in.
Oh, well, fair enough. Yeah, me too. Yeah. Sorry.
But personally, I feel really quite sick with guilt about it because I will get through it. Yeah. I'm pretty confident about that, but I'm going to just get through it. So I don't have the disposable income anymore to be charitable. That's already been taken away from. Yeah. I used to pick up the food bank parcels in the supermarket.
Morrison.
Stick a few in the trolley.
They're not there anymore. They're not there anymore.
I get them in mine.
Are they still there? I had to go asking for one the other day. But anyway, the point being that when you find the trolley to put them in, it's a lot barer than it used to be already, isn't it? Yeah.
And I've not got the disposable income to help. I mean, with warm banks, I've done it before, only once. I'm not trying to be a saint, but if someone's prepaying the card, I remember being in the shop and they were asking for gas, and it was like £4. So I'm like, ask the bloke to put some more money on for him. I've only done it once, but I'm just not going to have the opportunity.
You mustn't
to do
feel
that anymore.
guilty about that though, because you have done it when you could, and you can't do it when you can't. So there's nothing.
But it's the people who are just getting by are also the ones who are trying to look after the ones who are really struggling to get by.
It's often the way, you're right. There's a bloke who gave £3 million to the Tory party who's complaining very, very vociferously about Boris Johnson being shown the door of 10 Downing Street, and then you, who's struggling to make ends meet, can find a few quid to help someone who's even worse off.
Well, that's what makes me angry. That's where my anger and my shame comes from. And I feel angry that I like to be charitable and it's been taken away, and I feel like, well, Emma, you can cut back more. You will be able to help, but how can we help? How can we help with warm banks?
And even if you're absolutely right, even if we accept that the problem isn't going to be fixed by public spending, and I don't want to accept that. I think it's what's the sort of thing you pay your tax in expectation of, rightly or wrongly. If we wanted to fix it ourselves and go against that great Attlee quote about charity being a terrible thing because it's taxes that should pay for all this, they're not telling us how we can. That's something else that happens when you've got an absence of clarity and leadership.
It's just helplessness. It's just guilt and helplessness, and I'm working myself up and I'm getting angrier now. That's becoming my default emotion, but there's just nothing we can do. What could we... I can't pick up a bit of heat out my home and give it to somebody.
No, that's a great point, actually. I mean, that's why they're going to have to be publicly funded as opposed to food banks.
Community funded, yeah. Community maybe funded. We could do something community funded like food banks. Possibly we could find a way, but it's so difficult. And if we can't be charitable by our personal selves like we do normally...
It's remarkable, isn't it? I'll tell you what, Emma, if you think you're angry now, wait until you hear about the fact that the Cabinet has got some armoured cars from Audi. That's really going to tip you over the edge, isn't it?
Oh, well, it did this morning. I was raging.
Absolutely.
Raging and shaking my fist.
Shaking your fist at the blooming Cabinet with their blooming Audis. Honestly, what is it, the infantilisation of the UK or something worse? Emma, take care. And I'll say it again, I don't like the idea of guilt playing a part in your processes, because the more you're reacting to other people's suffering, I guess the more likely you are to feel bad about the fact that you can't help them more. But the idea that you've got anything to feel guilty about upset me a bit. Take care. Fiona is in Bakewell. Fiona, what would you like to say?
Well, I was just listening to your last caller, and I guess, feel very similar to most of your callers. I'm lucky. Yeah. I'll get through, hopefully, this winter. I've had arguments with my power producers, etc.
Right.
And changed what I've done. But my heart goes out to people who aren't going to be able to do that or have done that, and they're still not going to be able to pay the bills. And they shouldn't be in that position. We all pay our taxes. We, hopefully, if we earn enough money, we look to a government to help us look after ourselves and to catch the people that can't. And there are lots of people who can't. There are disabled people who are going to suffer more than most because they need their heat to stay warm, because they maybe can't move about. And our taxes have gone on irrelevant. You know, you talk about cars, armoured cars, etc. They can't buy any British ones. We don't have any British car manufacturers.
I don't want to start a phone in about cars, but as far as I'm aware, Jackie's checked it for us, and Morgan was bought by an Italian company in 2019, and of course Jaguar, I think, is Indian-owned now, so I don't know what they're wanging on about in the sun about British-built limousines.
There'll be a kit car from somewhere.
They could get a JCB. They're very government-friendly. I could see them driving around in a JCB like that.
There you go.
Oh, Lordy. What
Maybe
a mess.
That's what he's aiming at. But, you know, I'm so angry all the time. I listen to people. I obviously live in a very conservative area. And...
Well, do you account for it then? Because I don't live in a very conservative area. I've got some friends and family members, but they're more like Richard, the lad in Norwich earlier, who say, I've been a Conservative voter all my life, but I don't recognise this lot. Who's happy with this? Who's looking at this? And are we being too generous, do you think, when we say they simply don't know? The stuff we're talking about every day now.
They haven't got a clue because they've never had to go through that.
But you've never had to go. I've never had to go through it. How can you actually avoid the existence of it? So completely.
Because they don't see it. I mean, when you come here, you come to Bakewell, you don't see that. You see what on the face of it is a very affluent area. And because you're not going to go anywhere.
And you can't possibly say I'm out of touch because I read a newspaper every day, cover to cover. I know exactly what's going on. But if you want to speak about Meghan Markle, I could keep you company for three and a half. So they don't realise they're completely uninformed or ill-informed. They think they're across things and they're just completely unaware of the truth.
Yes,
and that brings us back to Brexit.
Most of the media is, don't even get me on that.
But it does, though. I mean, it is all part. How can you end up voting for something so ridiculous? Well, I think you'll find I'm very well informed. I read the newspaper every day, and those people in Brussels, they're awful. They're trying, and that's how it happens. It's not actually. Now we're getting to the end of it. It's not a great mystery, is it? If you rely upon corrupt news sources for your news, you end up doing stupid things.
Absolutely. Well, I go into the local little supermarket and possibly it's the Daily Mail and the Telegraph that are flying out the door. So that is where the information's coming from.
And on it goes until what? I know not. Until what? I know not. That could become my new catchphrase. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, everybody, that hour. I need it as much as you do. I did try to explain that at the beginning sometimes. I need the comfort of company as we contemplate this catastrophe. You can tell I'm in a good mood. I just hit my alliteration marks quite perfectly there. Up next, I think we'll head north. We'll talk about Nicola Sturgeon, Britishness, and the insistence that even if Scotland was independent, she'd still feel British. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I've got to stop doing this every day, and I've got to stop saying every day that I've got to stop doing this every day. And I've got to stop saying every day that I've got to stop saying every day that I've got to stop doing this every day. I could go on. You know what I think of at times like this, don't you? I think of mirrored elevators. What's he talking about now, says Keith. Mirrored elevators, where you've got a mirror behind you and a mirror in front of you. And theoretically, the reflection of the reflection of the reflection of the reflection will go on forever. I occasionally stumble into verbal spirals that are the sort of linguistic equivalent of the mirrored elevator. The idea, I've got to stop saying that, 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 I've got to stop doing this every day. But I really do have to stop doing this every day, sharing with you my concerns about serving up an unleavened diet of unhappiness. I don't think we'll stoop as low as talking about some of the crud being served up by the newspapers, but I don't know that we can just stare endlessly at the looming horrors of the UK's economy. So we'll talk now, because I really want to, actually. I find it fascinating, as you probably know already if you've even paid scant attention to the programme. Edinburgh Fringe Festival on Wednesday of last week, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, talked about still considering herself British despite pledging to break up the union. She said, this might surprise people, but do you know, I consider myself British as well as Scottish. British is an identity that comes from being part of the British Isles. We'll still be part of the British Isles, and independent Scotland would still be part of the British Irish Council that I go to right now as First Minister. Identity is a complex thing. Many people live in Scotland, are as Scottish as I am, but will have a very proud Pakistani or Indian or African identity. And I just found that really interesting. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. That's the only word I've got at the moment. I just found it really interesting. And I think, like you are probably doing now, I take it as a way of thinking about myself. And so I am essentially, I mean, what order would you put in? So I'm English, British, Irish, British, English, Irish, Irish, English, British. I don't have an Irish passport for another few weeks. I was born in England. I have only ever lived in England. I would support England in most conceivable sporting challenges. The possible only exception to that being, well, I doubt if Ireland are like underdog. I mean, generally speaking, England-Ireland, I can just sit back and love it because I don't really mind who loses. British, then. This is the key word. How British do I feel? Answer, when it comes to Scotland and increasingly Wales, I feel very British. But my sense of Britishness is what I feel, possibly wrongly. I feel my sense of Britishness to be threatened by the prospect of Scottish independence. I've talked about this before, and inevitably I was rather spectacularly misunderstood. Do you know, I was thinking the other day, I don't know if you heard Matthew Wright standing in for Nick Ferrari yesterday on The Breakfast Show. Matthew and I first worked together more years ago than I care to remember when we presented he presented and I was a daily feature on a television programme he did on Channel 5 called The Right Stuff. And it was a debate show, a little bit ahead of its time actually, in many ways. But if we ever found ourselves in full agreement with each other, there were three of us on the screen, as myself, Matthew, and a journalist called Kate Silverton, who you probably know as well. And we'd have a pre-production meeting. And if we were all in agreement on something that the producers were keen for us to talk about, so the more junior you are in the great scheme of things, the less say you have over what actually appears on a programme like that. And actually a programme like this as well, although I think I've earned my... But no, I'm allowed now to be in full control, full editorial control of this programme, but I've never had that on telly, and I can't imagine I ever would, actually. But the problem, of course, with a, quotes, debate show was always the danger of us all being in agreement with each other. It's why some particularly toxic people, if you were to start your career now and you had no conscience, actually, no. Do you know what? I think being a toxic quasi-fascist is becoming quite a crowded market in this country now. Seriously, I imagine that there are quite a lot of people who say things like, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you go and live somewhere else? Who are looking around and thinking, blimey, it's quite crowded. I'm going to have to go even further. I'm going to have to be even more obnoxious. Sangeeta took a call yesterday from a woman in Widnes who would fit right in on some of these weird new television stations that have grown up for people who don't think that the British media landscape is right-wing enough at the moment. We need more demonisation of refugees. But if all three of us agreed on something, then because I still had the little sixth form debating legacy going, I would adopt a position I completely disagreed with for the sake of the programme. So I would go on air and argue the polar opposite of what I believed in order to get the programme going. And everyone knew what was happening. Matthew knew, Kate knew, the producers knew. It was all. But imagine if this was the era of the clip. Could you imagine? I found a clip of James O'Brien defending the death penalty or something. I don't know if I ever actually defended the death penalty, but because I saw it all as a game and it was very much presented on mornings like that as a bit of a game, I would have been arguing position. Because if you've ever done debating in a sort of formal setting, it's much more fun and much more challenging to argue from a position you don't believe in. You work much harder, you dig much deeper, you reach much further. I mean, grief. It would have been incredible. So it's a shame that you can't say anything really anymore within a sort of 90-second framework that couldn't be, by cynical people acting in bad faith, chopped up and presented up as evidence of you being a complete wrong-un. So when I've said in the past that my only reservations about Scottish independence are essentially born of a slightly selfish sense of Britishness, I'm speaking about the same sense that Nicola Sturgeon is talking about. So I should find what she says reassuring. Even if Scotland is independent, you'll still be British, you'll still feel British. But I don't think I will. I think when I go to visit an independent Scotland, I won't feel the same as I do when I visit English towns at the moment. Do you see what I mean? I feel more like, maybe not immediately, but imagine 100 years from now, my great-great-great-grandson, who's pretty fine, would feel visiting Scotland the same as they would feel visiting America or I mean, somewhere English-speaking, Australia. Obviously, it's nearer. Don't bother pointing out the joke. I don't know. So I just found this really, really interesting. After independence, Nicola Sturgeon, who describes, quite rightly, national identity as complex, would still consider herself British. And I want to know whether you would. 0345. I knew I'd make a mistake. I got it. I said it was Tuesday. I got it all right. And then I just said Sangeeta was on yesterday, didn't I? When she was actually on Sunday. So I did all right there, I think. Sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. Every blooming body. This isn't a uniquely Scottish conversation. It's a British conversation, but I'm really interested in that hierarchy of, is it loyalty? Is it belonging? Is it a hierarchy of belonging? Gethin is in Anglesey. He says, I'm Welsh, but I feel very proud of being British until I watch our athletes standing victorious and have to listen to an English anthem. Not at the Commonwealth Games, I don't think, do you? I don't know. Shouldn't have said that out loud without checking. Britain to me is Ireland, Scotland and Wales. England just sees being British as an extension of Englishness. Thank you, Gethin. That's exactly the angle I've been looking for on why I find this so interesting. So being British means something very different to Scottish, Welsh and Irish people, most obviously people from Northern Ireland, than it does to English people, because English people like me, and this is where my arrogance comes in, which is what upset, I think, a lot of pro-independence people when I talked about Britishness. There's an arrogance attached to Britishness if you're English. You sort of think Britishness is just Englishness squared, whereas to Scottish, Welsh and Irish people, it's a much more intrinsic part of their identity, and therefore, when Nicola Sturgeon says she'll still feel British after independence, it's perfectly possible that I will feel less British, but she will feel equally British. Do you want to try and unpick that? 0345 6060 973. And do you know what? Let's go a little further. Well, I want to get this right. It's really interesting. I know a lot of people in Scotland are more worried about their bins at the moment than they are about Britishness, but you know, light and shade on this show, if nothing else. What is Britishness in the context of Scottish independence? Or Welsh independence, but most obviously Scottish independence. What is Britishness? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And talk to me directly about Nicola Sturgeon's comments about if independence is achieved, it will not, as far as I can tell, what she's saying is it will not in any way make her feel less British. I consider myself British as well as Scottish. Can you still be British in an independent Scotland? Is that a fair question, or am I going to get my head ripped off? Well, there's only one way to find out. 03456060973. It's 12:15. 16 after 12. A few of you questioning Nicola Sturgeon's motives on this. Pippa puts it pithily. She says she's only saying it because independence is in serious trouble. People are now aware of issues such as pensions and currency, and Brexit has shown that being isolated and smaller is not for the best. We are not having the independence debate, except insofar as it calls into question the credibility of what Nicola Sturgeon has said about Britishness. Quite a few of you are actually picking up on this and saying that she's only saying it to appease people who are sceptical about independence, and therefore it's designed somewhat cynically to persuade people who feel very British that independence won't actually change anything for them. There's loads coming in on this, on the text as well as the calls. I'll hit the phones and I'll try and get through as many texts as I can. Also, we haven't spoken to Theo for ages. I don't know if there's any political news, but he's back in the office today. I haven't seen him for a while. Should we just summon the Usherwood and see what he's got, whether he's got anything to talk about? And if not, we'll just, chew the fat for a bit and send him on his way. Shall we? Yes, I haven't done this for a while. Summon the Usherwood. I hope he's in. I haven't seen him since 10 o'clock. He might have gone home. Brian's in Glasgow. Brian, what made you pick up the phone?
How you doing, James? Good to speak to you.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, this is a great question. I've been waiting for something like this to be touched on by yourself.
God, I'm worried now. That sounded quite threatening.
Not at all. You and I have probably got more in common than we do through our Irishness and adoption than we do anything else. But
lovely. Go on.
What I was going to go was that essentially what I was just saying there to your producer, and you touched on it as well, was that Britishness is just essentially an extension of English. Right. This British accent, stuff up our lip, all that kind of thing. And I think that is half of the reason why a lot of Scottish people want this separation. I would say that I'm British by passport only.
You don't feel remotely British? It means nothing to you?
No, it doesn't mean anything to me at all. But in such a sense, neither does being Scottish, because I'm different. From you go 15, 16 miles up the road from where I live, people start saying Ken.
It's a terrible phone line, Brian. I'm not going to be able to stay on with you for as long as I can. But why don't you feel Scottish?
No, I do. I feel Scottish. I say I feel more Scottish than I do feel British. But
yeah,
it's broken down, and you know what it's like up here. And the argument is going to come right down the middle. I heard someone texted in or emailed in and said, it shows you what happens when you go smaller, things start to fail.
Yes.
Well, my goodness, why doesn't she want to get independence and become part of, hopefully, the European Union again, instead of just backing down?
I know, and I'll allow that, but that is part of the reason why I said we weren't going to be having the independence debate, but that seems to me a reasonable contribution to... So Britishness means absolutely nothing.
I'm British by passport only.
Yeah. So your thoughts on what Nicola Sturgeon has said? I mean,
I don't know. I think.
No, I know. But what do you think? What do you think? Yeah, None of us know. What do you think?
I know. I think that the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon as well have been in charge that long, and if this independence thing boiling under, that there's appeasement starting to take place, and a warm street under a cosy table,
okay.
Listen, I'll say one last thing before you put me away. Is that
I can't hear what you're saying. The line's not good enough. But you finish it, so just say it in a sentence, and then we'll crack on.
Okay. I have English cousins that I'm very close to, and I'm close to them as a human being next to me.
Right.
I don't want to take it to a nationalising level where I feel the same nationality.
That's family, isn't it? Yeah.
Completely different accent, completely different state of mind. So we would react.
No, I said a sentence, and I wasn't exaggerating. A phone line just coming in and out. English cousins. So I'd like to have dug into your family tree there, but the phone line wasn't up to it. Alan's in Fife. Alan, what do you make of these comments?
Yeah, I totally understand it, James. I think that it's a very individual perspective.
Looks like it.
I think, for me, I was saying that I have an English father, Scottish mother, ex-Navy from school, had a real sense of Britishness, but I've lost that completely over a number of years.
Right. Why?
And I think that...
Why?
I think it's about, it's about values, it's about a sense of what's important to you, and it's about being part of a collective. And I think that just the way the country's gone over, 10, 20 years, I just feel less connected to being British.
But it's the same country that it was in some sense when you did feel connected to it. It's temporary political impacts that you're describing, is it, or is it deeper than that?
No, I think it's deeper than that. I think that there's a direction of society that feels different in Scotland. I still think it feels together and less.
Josh?
This is going to sound strange. Actually, less divisive. It's a word that people use about the independence debate, but I actually think that it's less divisive in Scotland. It's less politicised. It's about values in society.
I think here's a very good text, actually, just picking up with what you've said. You're still technically European after leaving the EU, but we don't feel. I mean, we're not European in most senses of the word now. So you would not be British. Technically, you'd still be British, like the last lad said, British by passport, but you wouldn't feel. Well, you don't really feel British now. So do you think Nicola Sturgeon is being a bit cheeky here?
I don't know. I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Sometimes when you read about Nicola Sturgeon in the press, people say she doesn't speak for Scotland.
Yes.
And I think what she's given is an opinion that for some people, they'll still align and feel part of what was Britain.
Yes.
But not, so maybe she's just reassuring some people that actually independence doesn't mean to say you have to give up everything.
Well, it won't change geography, but this is why it's such an interesting subject, because it's a landmass. It's a description of a landmass. It's not a description of a people. You will no longer be British people in an independent Scotland, but you will be living in Britain, is one argument.
It's true. I have family in Southampton too. My nieces are down there.
Yeah.
When I go down there, I don't think I'll feel any different in an independent Scotland. When I go down there, I don't feel more or less British, more or less Scottish.
No, but I think this is why it means different things depending on which side of the border you're on. Because I think I will feel more of a visitor in Scotland after independence than I do now, and that's fine. I used to get on my high horse about, that'll be really sad, but get over yourself. I'll still love it. I'll still love visiting. Yeah. I'll still have a brilliant time. I would just feel slightly less. I feel slightly more like a visitor than I do at the moment. That's all.
And I would hope that we would get you past that pretty quickly.
Well, I might be seeking asylum if things carry on like this. I'll come up in my kayak. Thank you. It's 23 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So what does Nicola Sturgeon... Not a lot of synergy, is that the right word? With Nicola Sturgeon on this one. And that means that the suggestion that she is, whether consciously or not, appealing to people whose Britishness is more important to them than their Scottishness, and therefore they are not in favour of independence. That gains a little bit of weight. Jamie's in Blairgowrie in Scotland, like all my callers so far. What do you make of this, Jamie?
Well, actually, James, hi, thanks for having me on the
You're very
show.
Welcome.
Yeah, cool. So, personally, I think she's trying to appeal to, like your previous caller says, she's trying to appeal to those that would favour independence but equally still feel British, which unfortunately, in some people, well, that's not me. I've always felt proud to be Scottish.
Yes.
Although living
well,
in
she's
Britain,
pretty proud to be Scottish too, and yet she also feels British. You don't, I sense.
No. I lived in the southeast of England for almost 20 years.
Right.
And there was always, although I've got many English friends and people from other places around the world that I worked with in the industry that I did in down south, there was always this underlying feeling that you weren't classed as British as such. The odd jokes here and there, but people take them as jokes and sayings, sweaty sock, this, that, and the other. And it depends how it's said, of course, as to whether you take it offensively or not, or who says it. But ultimately, for me, I don't agree with her comments, and I think if Scotland does gain independence, then I would never class myself as British.
No, I think I'm going to end up where you are on this, oddly, and I don't particularly want to, and I've got no skin in the game. Well, I haven't got as much skin in the game as part of the nation that will be. Well, the two nations, part of the bloc that will be broken, that will be split up. But if you take your history, and Nicola Sturgeon will be well aware of this, it was two very separate kingdoms that were united by dint of genealogy, wasn't it? Family trees. And they were they were fighting wars against each other not long before they became united, and a little bit after. So the idea that there's some historic sameness just doesn't actually stand up to scrutiny. No,
I totally agree with that. As well. And like the other previous caller says, I'm British only in passport.
But what about people who I hope they ring me now, and I've got a couple of phone lines free, 0345 606 0973. What about people who will feel, Scottish people who will feel something quite profound has been lost when Scotland becomes independent? There are people, they're good people, you will know these people, who are truly Scottish and British, as if they're two legs of the same stool.
Yeah, I've got family and friends that will no doubt still feel British, but I think, like you intimated earlier, it's a personal feeling rather. Geographically and politically, obviously, we'll be separated. Politically we'd be separated, but not geographically. And people free to make their own choices and feel how they feel. But me, personally, I don't know why she made that comment. But like I said, it's a personal thing if that's how she wants to feel. But
if that is how she feels, a lot of people. Sandy, who's in Edinburgh, puts it like this: please don't be duped by Nicola Sturgeon, James. The SNP tried to persuade us that nothing would change after independence. Am I getting duped? Oh, I see what you mean. Right. So she's appealing not to Sandy, who wouldn't want independence, but to people like Sandy, who perhaps will be softened in their opposition if they think nothing much is really going to change. But we're not having the independence debate. I want to make that clear. Jamie, thank you. Sandy, thank you too. 27 after 12, squeezing one more before the news. David is in Shetland. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, David.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
So please be gentle. I find a really interesting thing happened at the weekend. Well, just there, went into a hotel for the first time ever when I checked in the nationality. I put Scottish because the independence referendum, I voted to stay because I believe genuinely that bigger is better and being part of the bigger bloc. But to me, it's about what you stand for. Land is land, and it's what a country stands for. And I don't recognise Britain now. With the sort of place that is sitting there, really talking about warm banks so that people don't die, is not something I want to associate with. And I couldn't feel further from Britain, if I'm really honest. So
but that will be happening in Scotland. That will probably be happening in Scotland as well. Well, it is. It's happening in Scottish cities as well. But you're seeing it as a consequence of Westminster's government.
Yes, and also, if you look at how we're aligned, Scotland is much more left-leaning in its voting. If you look at the sort of policies we put in place about education, tuition fees, prescription charges, we are it feels like a country that wants to look after its people, and that is something I can align with and get behind. I just don't recognise Britain.
That's Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. It's not the Britain of Gordon Brown or Tony Blair or Ed Miliband or Keir Starmer.
Yeah, exactly. But we voted him back in, or Britain voted him back in. And when we've got the media doing what it's doing, and people that you hear calling in and saying they would still vote for him.
Yeah, I can't argue with you, can I really? Because all I do when I start framing an argument about, history and isn't it nice to be holding hands and all that nonsense, I imagine how I'd feel if I was Scottish, if I was living in Scotland and I couldn't fault a single syllable of what you've just said. So what do you think, briefly, because I've just seen a bloke who looks a lot like Theo Usherwood, briefly, what do you think Nicola Sturgeon is up to when she says this? Is she being a bit? She is being a bit cheeky, isn't she?
I think so. I think it's about trying to win votes. And weirdly, right now, it's actually the wrong direction for me.
Yeah.
If she wants independence, what she needs to do is play to her strengths. If she plays to the strengths of Scotland being a country that's left-leaning, that will look after its people, that will do its level best to look after people, that's something I can identify with. And if that was Britain, I would consider myself British. And if that was Europe, I would consider myself European.
Okay, so it's values more than...
Yes.
land, as you say, more than soil. That's why the nationalists always go on about blood and soil, isn't it? Whereas because they don't have any values.
You could ignore the rest.
Yeah, exactly that. I love it. Thank you, David. And taking us back, I think, to Sandy's point about this being part of a sort of psyop or a mind game designed to persuade people that nothing would actually change after independence, which David and Sandy agree about, although they disagree about independence. They think that's the direction that Nicola Sturgeon is pulling in, because it's not the same as talking about how great and different everything would be. Oh, that is interesting. How great and different everything would be if we were independent, as opposed to how little would actually change. It depends who you're trying to woo. That's a fascinating calculation. We'll talk more about that. 31 minutes after 12 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 33 minutes after 12. I'm having a bit of a wibble, or at least a wobble, because I do still feel European, despite no longer being in the European Union. But the European Union was never a country. I have a fellow feeling with European countries. Just this text that made me think there. James, don't you still feel European? I'm a Scot, I'm British, and I'm European. I want to be a citizen of an independent Scotland, which swings us back to giving Nicola Sturgeon a bit more of a break, actually, and she's not being cynical at all. But then I've got Sandy's words ringing in my ears saying, don't be duped. Don't be duped. I don't think I'm being duped. I think that after Scotland has become independent, just because the bulk of my callers so far sort of reject Britishness, it's not a choice between the two, is it? It's not you're either British or you're Scottish. It's an opportunity to be both. So yeah, I'm British and Irish. I'm English and British. English and British is the best. Well, and a bit Irish. Anglo-British. Anglo-Brit? No, that's not right, is it? They say Anglo-Irish, but British. Oh, what a mess. Neil's in West Lothian. Neil, what do you reckon?
Thanks, James. Just 2 points, really. I think what a lot of my fellow Scots are not grasping is that to be British, to be Scottish is to be British.
Yes.
I think if people equate Britishness with Englishness, then you're not going to feel part of it. But I think people need to be proud in Scotland about the contribution that Scotland makes towards Britain before they're so quick to turn their back on it. And in terms of leaving, I mean, I felt gutted the day that I found that I was no longer a citizen of the European Union.
Yeah, me too.
I never felt French. I never felt Italian. But I still had a sense of loss when that was taken from me.
Oh.
And I would feel exactly the same if I was taken out of the United Kingdom.
Crikey, this is just mad, isn't it? Because I'm changing my opinion with every caller. That doesn't really happen anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the bottom line in all of this, James, is that I'm afraid our First Minister is not making a good job of running our country.
No.
So we get distracted with all this talk of independence, with the worst drug deaths in Europe. She can't build a ferry to service our island communities. Edinburgh is awash with rubbish. I mean, it's hardly an advertisement for how things could be great if she was in charge of an independent Scotland.
No, I'm just, as I did with the previous callers on the other side of this particular divide, I'm going to put a very gentle bit of pressure on the brake there, because that's not even if your analysis of Nicola Sturgeon is correct, it's not an argument against independence any more than my criticisms of Boris Johnson are an argument against government in Britain, you know.
Yep.
Having a government.
Absolutely. It's who's running the show. If you don't like the house, if you don't like the wallpaper, don't move house. You could change the flavour of the government, so it's not an argument against independence.
What if you got your wallpaper paid for by a donor after secretly approaching him for money and denying it?
Scotland becomes independent, we're all going to get free wallpaper. That's probably what we'll be told.
Take care, Neil. Thank you. 12:36 is the time. Here he is. Theo, I wish you were back in the house.
We haven't spoken for a very long time.
It feels like weeks. Well, it probably is
a couple of months even.
I've missed you. The show's not the same without you.
It's great to be back. Just to bring you up to date with a couple of bits of news. The Brexit car, the Prime Minister's Brexit car. Well, I say it's a Brexit car. It's not a Brexit car. It's a Jaguar.
Yes.
British-made Jaguar. Number 10 is just confirmed.
British-made, Indian-owned.
Yes, but made here on these shores.
Right.
Assembled here.
Yeah.
I think it's just outside Coventry. The Prime Minister has one of these cars, and so do a number of top-level cabinet ministers for whom the security risk is deemed to be the highest. It's now going to be, and this was actually the Sun's story, it's now going to be a German-made Audi A8.
Yes.
Number 10, though, firmly putting the blame this morning on the Metropolitan Police, saying it's up to them to make decisions when it comes to security. And I've been on the phone to Metropolitan Police, and they're not commenting because they say it's a security matter. Well, I have put in an email to them asking for exactly why they decided to make that decision.
You obviously haven't heard my thoughts on this story, which I was sharing earlier in the programme. The problem with this is that it doesn't matter, except in the context of Brexit silliness. Who cares? Is it a good car? Is it going to protect our Prime Minister? Do we get good miles to the gallon? It really is.
Is it economical?
Is it economical? And the idea that the Sun thinks, well, of course the Sun do. And Downing Street, because of what they're built on, can't turn around and say, you're really asking us about where we bought our car from at a time when hang on, don't mention the hospitals, don't mention the schools, don't mention the pubs, don't mention the care homes, don't mention it. So anyway, any real news?
Liz Truss, again, sticking with the Conservative government, Liz Truss is accused of avoiding scrutiny, of course, because it was going to be her only standalone political interview.
I didn't know she'd agreed to it. When did she agree to it?
She didn't initially agree to it. Then she agreed to it, and now she's pulling out of it, saying that she's too busy to take.
So she's the hokey-cokey of prime ministerial candidates.
Yeah, it took her a long time to agree.
When does she start shaking it all about? Remind me to go on holiday.
Rishi Sunak has done 9 of 9 broadcast interviews.
Yeah, but again, fat lot of good he's done him.
So, yeah, we look at it from a media point of view and scrutiny, looking at it from a campaign point of view, from the political campaign point of view, the question would be, why would you do it? Because it's just a risk to do it. If you think that your candidate might make a mistake.
It's pretty bald with an A. This approach to it is just to say, I haven't got time.
Ride it out.
Yeah.
They're literally 4 days.
Brazen is the word I'm looking for.
4 days. 4 days until the polls close, and then the new leader will be announced on Monday with the Prime Minister, the switchover that we've become quite familiar with in the last few years on Tuesday.
Let joy be unconfined. You're not on this farewell tour of Britain as Boris Johnson spent his last week as Prime Minister highlighting his achievements in 10 Downing Street. I was going to send you on that so you could tell us what they are.
There are going to be some announcements, we're told, towards the end of the week, particularly around energy.
But he's already told us he can't make any announcements, particularly around that.
And Liz Truss has already said that she's not going, or just said even, that she's not going to make any announcements in terms of support that's going to be offered until she has the full support of that comes with being a Prime Minister.
But she also said no handouts and no windfall taxes.
Yes, she did.
And tax cuts.
She's trying to create herself, I think, some room.
Yeah, so her first act as Prime Minister is going to be completely disown her last act as a Prime Ministerial candidate, which is pretty much of a piece with British politics since 2016. What's the mood like? What's the sort of
waiting
jibber jabber?
We're waiting.
Yes, but is Johnson sulking? Is he? Did you see Rory Stewart's comments about him trying a Berlusconi type comeback?
I think what's interesting is usually at this time of year, any Prime Minister would visit the Queen. They go through the formalities of visiting the Queen in Balmoral. That's what happens. You'll be familiar with that. The Prime Minister's not visiting the Queen this year. He's decided, obviously, against that. We've been told his diary for the rest of the week, which remains top secret until it happens for obvious reasons. And he's not going to be doing that. So I think one might say that actually this week at least, he's doing his farewell tour. It's on his own terms. He's not necessarily going to go through the protocols that might otherwise be expected of him. And then, of course, it'll be the turn to hand over the keys to number 10 early next week.
And the Privileges Committee investigation, that's about to come careering back to the forefront of our contemplations, isn't it?
I expect that there will be some efforts from whoever wins this contest, and we're expecting Liz Truss to win this contest, to try and draw a line and say, well, listen, the Prime Minister has left. Therefore, because he has left, there's no need for this committee to hold its investigations. But of course, the Privileges Committee, the investigation that it holds, could have implications for Boris Johnson long term.
Do they have the power to do that, or would that be a whip? That would be a.
Well, they would have the power. They would have the power potentially to suspend him from the House of Commons.
No, I mean, does the new Prime Minister have the power to nix the committee investigation? Because they don't. They can let it be known that they don't. Any Tories on it will be persona non grata or whatever it may be.
And it's a Tory majority, of course, as well.
It's not anymore, I don't think, since that woman, the female MP. I think it might be neck and neck now.
But I think they have to I'll check. I may be wrong on this.
There's one woman MP who's let it be known that she's not taking part in this investigation.
Laura
Ferris.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one. Presumably, if they did try to nix it, then Zach Goldsmith, or what's his correct title, Lord Goldsmith of multiple election failures,
Richmond Park,
he would he'd be furious because he brought in that recall thing to allow constituents to respond to their MPs behaving in a way that they
yes,
didn't like.
He did bring
so
that
he'd probably have to stop lending Boris Johnson his holiday home, would he? Or would he just sort of go down in history as an enormous hypocrite?
So
good to have you back here. Don't worry. 12:42 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. When will we see you next?
Soon.
Fantastic.
Whenever I'm invited.
Always invited. So you don't have to wait for the summers. Just saunter in, pour yourself a sherry, grab some cashew nuts. Billy's in Glasgow. Billy, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. The way I was thinking about, the only way, I'm not saying she is thinking this way, but when I was talking to a producer, it's about when you talk to somebody from America, say, and they say, where are you from? They'll say, I'm from Texas.
They will.
But
unless they're not. Say, I mean, some people will say, I'm from Pennsylvania, won't they?
Yeah, that's it. But it's like, a lot of these people have pride in what state they're from, and states have got their own sort of laws and governors and the way they do things. But they're also still part of America, if you know what I mean. I know. With this,
I don't want to fall out with my first half callers, but I am actually leaning back towards that position that it's a perfectly plausible feeling to have. Although we all agree that it's very personal. Some people don't feel remotely British. I think that the notion of Britishness is real as the notion of Scottishness, and it's very much in the heart of the holder, to which feels bigger than the other, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I spoke to a producer there, and she said, look, I say I'm from London. And again, London is like a state in itself. Everybody knows it. It's like everything kind of is based around London.
Yeah, but it doesn't have it doesn't tug the heartstrings in the way that other loyalties do, other feelings do.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that, but I mean, everybody from region to region, everybody's proud of what they are. I mean,
think Yorkshire is a better example than London. Actually, I think Yorkshire will probably going to get more of a heartstring from Yorkshire people than you are from London. I could be wrong. I don't want my phones to ring off the hook with angry Londoners saying they feel more Londoner than British, but I don't think many people do feel more London than British.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
think. But it's just a thing. I mean, obviously not going into the independence thing, but it's. The cultures are so different from the way things are happening right now.
Yeah, that's a crucial
point. What you were just talking to the Usherwood about things there, the way things are, and the way things are up here. It's so different. The way
that is
look after people.
Yeah, and I'm moving on that with every passing month, because you start off thinking, well, come on, look, things are bad for now. Don't let that put you off the union entirely, because you don't leave the house just because the wallpaper's awful. But the more awful the wallpaper gets, and the more impossible it proves to change it, then the harder it becomes for me to sustain that position. This is strong. Thank you, Billy. This is strong from Andrew, who is he's a former diplomat, actually. I'm a new Scot who grew up in England and represented the UK, including Scotland, around the world for many years. The concept of Britishness as it relates to Great Britain, its inhabitants, its military and the like, long predates the Union, with origins in the 15th to 17th centuries. That's me told. How we feel about it now depends on contemporary political developments and our personal experiences. For my part, I feel very welcome in Scotland, proud to have had the opportunity to serve all in Great Britain and Northern Ireland and overseas territories, and sad at the chaos engulfing the UK. I suspect I'd feel the same if I had a similar CV, except that final question of whether or not the Britishness is diminished or diluted in any way with independence. I suspect for Andrew and for many of my contributors not. But for what was the breakdown in the referendum? I wonder if the percentages would be about the same. Except, of course, that Nicola Sturgeon is the one that's talking about Britishness being uncompromised by independence. 12:46 is the time. 12:49 is the time. Remarkable, really, and rather remiss of me to have got to 10 to 1 this afternoon without mention of Pakistan, where the flooding has been. We use the word apocalyptic, don't we, as a sort of figure of speech. A deliberate hyperbole, but my goodness me, the scenario there it's terrifying. So we're going to rectify that immediately by talking to Sabina Siddiqui, who is joining us from Karachi, the largest city in Pakistan. I'll begin with what I hope isn't a silly question, Sabina, which is, was this in any way foreseen or expected, the scale of this disaster?
Oh, never, never, ever. We have never had. We had floods in 2010, but I think they were like 10% of this, and this is like a calamity. It's like something we never imagined. We've had non-stop rains since 2-3 months, and along with that, a rise in the temperature. We have hotter summers now, and because of that, I was just reading. We have like 7,000 glaciers over here, and they are melting as well. So this scale is something we never ever imagined. Yeah.
And how is it? I mean, some of the stories, some of the statistics lose impact really when they're numbers rather than humans. But in terms of the population moving, people fleeing the floodwater, people being dispossessed and rendered homeless, what sort of figures are we looking at?
In my opinion, I think around 50 million people have been affected. A lot of them have not been able to migrate because they are stuck in the waters. So they have just found refuge on higher ground, and they are being given food supplies on those spots. In the mountainous parts of the country, like in KPK, the northern areas, from there the army has rescued people and brought them to like bigger cities. But in Sindh, like the province where I live, it's 60% of it is submerged, and you can't even go there with a Land Cruiser or anything. Only the army has been able to reach there with helicopters, and it has rescued people and brought them to schools and different community halls and places like that. And that's where they have lost their homes completely. Those homes will have to be reconstructed. They have lost their crops for now, and they have lost their livestock. A huge amount of livestock is dead. And even for a big city like Karachi, where I live, I mean, food security issues have emerged. Like we are having a paucity in supply of vegetables, and we might have milk and other things as well, because all of this food used to come from the rural areas. So Punjab, I think we have like the biggest province, our biggest province is Punjab. Only the south of it is submerged, but Sindh is totally, 60% is the most. The flood water levels have gone down.
Sorry, carry on, Sabina.
The flood water levels have gone down in the north and it's receding. But now all that water has to flow down through our province to the sea. So now our province is going to be the worst hit, and more waters will be coming.
I mean, you paint a terrifying picture, but you remind us also that when the waters have receded, only then does the full scale of the horror emerge.
Absolutely. Right now, we can only find them shelter and food. After a couple of months, probably they'll start reconstructing their dwellings or whatever. It's going to take some time. And it might take years to get back to where they were. It will take years. It's not a matter of months.
What's the political context? Is the government being blamed? Is there a sense that more could have been done, or is it almost being viewed as an act of God?
I think it would be very unrealistic to blame the government for this, because the amount of rain we have had is 700 times more than what we usually have. 500 to 700 times it's more. In some parts it's 500%. In my province it's been 700%. So you just can't blame somebody if there's an earthquake or a calamity or something. No government could have faced it. No amount of infrastructure could have been built for this. It's just
it is utterly unprecedented. That may change with the reconstruction process. There'll be a need for political leadership with the reconstruction process.
Yes, later on,
And on a personal level, you're seeing parts of your province that have never been flooded before completely submerged. It must be
completely submerged. The tops of the trees are showing.
Good grief.
Yeah, I have pictures on my Twitter as well, and many videos to share.
Do we have any idea of when the waters will have gone?
We are hoping that the monsoon season has ended, and now if it stays, there's no more rain. In a week or so, it will start going down and it will be accessible.
A week with no more rain. Sabina Siddiqui, many thanks indeed. I shall share some of those images you mentioned on your Twitter account shortly, but that is an unbelievable statistics in terms of the people affected. Sabina estimating 50 million, which seems plausible. The coverage I was reading 24 hours ago had it at about 33, and that idea of things being so completely destroyed that the question of rebuilding infrastructure and stuff continues. We may talk about this tomorrow in the context of your family members in Pakistan who have been affected, and we resist the urge to wonder why it gets a little bit less coverage perhaps in this country than you might otherwise expect, simply by dint of the number of people who will have family members in Pakistan. Sabina, many thanks. Kieran is in Belfast to steer us back. To steer us back to the Britishness question. A perfect place to call from, I think, Kieran. What would you like to say?
Absolutely. It's great to speak to you, James.
Likewise.
The question, or I suppose the puzzlement that I have whenever I hear debates such as this, is what is it really that makes Britishness feel so fragile whenever these kinds of questions come up? And I mean, from my perspective, I'm a young man. I'm 31 years of age, child of the peace agreement.
Yes.
4 or 5 generations of my family have lived continuously in the north under partition.
Just move your phone. Your phone's gone a bit funny, Kieran, and you need to have it a bit closer to your ear and your mouth. Sorry to sound like your granddad, but go on, speak up, boy.
Well, speaking of my granddad, like I said, 4 or so generations of my family have lived under partition for over the last 100 or so years.
Yes.
And in no way has our sense of Irishness ever been diminished or ever felt less than. Because yours outsiders in this place,
Yeah, up to a point, Lord Copper, because the whole Republican movement is built upon a sense of Irishness being diluted or
I don't think so, and I know that.
Well, what's it built on then?
I know, for instance, that Jerry Adams has said that that's absolutely not the case. That in no way has his Irishness certainly been diminished by 100 years of partition. I know that I heard that in an interview with BBC Northern Ireland. But what I would say is that certainly the Republican movement is built on the idea that the dispensation of governance needs to change. Not so much that a sense of Irishness has ever been active or successfully diminished.
Okay, let me come at it from let's say that unification is achieved. Mm-hmm. It would be very hard for your unionist neighbours to cling on to their sense of Britishness in those circumstances, wouldn't it?
I certainly don't see why. I mean,
what would they say?
Well, for instance, whenever partition happened in 1921, there were many hundreds of thousands of Protestant, Unionist, Loyalists.
Mate, we're going to run out of time. We're going to run out of time. And the point I'm making. They feel their Britishness is...
but I don't agree.
They feel their Britishness is somehow being diluted by checks on pet food coming in to the country. So the idea that it wouldn't feel the people we're talking about wouldn't feel affronted by the unification of Ireland is, for what it's worth, I'm with you on everything you've said regarding partition and the rest of it. But come on, man, you're not pretending that the DUP are going to be cool. They're going to feel equally British in a united Ireland as they do in the United Kingdom.
No, and the DUP have a long history of being apoplectic about pretty much everything. and
so we're finally in agreement. We're in agreement then. You're being a bit disingenuous. Of course. They'd be bloody furious, man.
To a degree, but I don't see why anything that would be core to your identity, something that you would cherish and care about.
I agree with you. What you mean is a rational, sensible sense of national identity that has more to do with values and people than it does with blood and soil. Shouldn't in any way be compromised by what we're talking about. And we'll have to wait for another occasion to find out what people who disagree with us would have to say about that somewhat deliberately provocative suggestion, with which I agree entirely. I mean, my sense of Britishness, Irishness, Englishness, whatever it may be, would never be threatened by border checks, or it's in your heart, isn't it? It's not in your passport. Or indeed, for our earlier Scottish callers, vice versa. It's entirely in your passport. Their Britishness is not remotely in their heart. That's it from me for another day. Sheila Fogarty is away this week. I should have mentioned this earlier, which means that Sangeeta Maiska will be with you all week. 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 With you all week.
your eyes.